A few words about this gospel. It's the gospel for next Sunday's reading. So I'll be speaking more about it on Sunday at the 11:15 Mass, but just a few comments on it. The setting is the Sea of Galilee. That's very important when we study the life of Jesus, because almost the entire life of Jesus is spent around the Sea of Galilee. It's about 65 miles north of Jerusalem, but the time Jesus spends in Jerusalem is very, very little, the last week of his life, essentially. Now, he'll make some visits there and do some cures there and preach in the temple, porticos of the temple, but 98% of his time is spent in the north, in Galilee, all around the Sea of Galilee. Around the Sea of Galilee is Nazareth, Capernaum, Mount of Beatitudes, the Transfiguration, which we had on Sundays up there. And so all of these places, all around the Sea of Galilee. So that's where Jesus spends most of his life, around the sea. Sea of Galilee is a very interesting place. It's 700 feet below sea level. It's the lowest in the world freshwater lake below sea level. And there's a phenomenon there, a meteorological phenomenon, whereas because it's so low beneath sea level, the air is very warm. And there's a valley on the eastern side of it called the Valley of the Doves. And sometimes the winds come down through the valley and they're cold winds. And when they come to the lake and they mix with the warm winds, you have a storm. So storms are very common. So this is realistic. It's not a metaphor, it's not an imagination. This really would have happened. On one occasion, years and years ago, I was crossing the sea. It's only about 7 miles wide. It's 14 miles from top to bottom. And I was coming out of a fishing kibbutz. I wanted to see how they fish, how they fish today, or how they fished back in the time of Jesus. And halfway out from Ein Gedi, which was the kibbutz, a storm came up. And I said, now I understand the gospel. There's a storm here, the winds blew and the rains, so I can see this. The teaching that Matthew wants us to grasp here has to do with the power of Jesus Christ. Peter says, if it is really you, let me walk on the water. And he says, come. And as long as he's looking at Jesus, he can do this extraordinary thing of walking on the water. But then he becomes frightened. And once he becomes frightened, he takes his eyes off Jesus and he worries about the waves. Then he begins to sink. So what Matthew wants to tell us is, in a time of turmoil, when there's upheaval in your life and you're struggling, focus on Jesus. Once you take your focus off Jesus, you will sink. You won't have the same uplift, the same power, you won't have the same confidence, you won't have the same faith. That's exactly what Matthew wants to teach us here. I'll talk more about it on Sunday. But wherever you are in your life, challenges you have, reversals you have, difficulties, focus on Jesus. Focus on Jesus. Then the power of Jesus Christ will carry you. Amen. We pause now for a moment of prayer.